Packers and Cowboys on Sunday Night Football gave us the first 40-40 tie in NFL history. There are definitely a lot of talking points coming out of this one. Katie Caldwell, Jeff Floyd back here with you today. Jeff, let's start with how the game ended. That was one of the most nonchalant drives I've ever seen. Green Bay nearly lost the game because of clock management. What were the Packers doing? Like, one thing to me about great teams, they can handle situational football, and that wasn't my big takeaway from watching that drive.
I absolutely kind of agree with you. Like, I know in that situation, you're like, hey, we've got the field goal in our back pocket, which is
Yeah,
fine. But like, can we show a tad bit more desperation to actually try and get the W?
maybe a bit of
There was a
urgency.
that's exactly what I'm thinking, and it was so weird. And trying to explain to some people today who did not stay up for the entirety of it, and I am one of those poor suckers that did, and I was like, "All right, here we go," and then it was like, "Oh, no, overtime." And, of course, we went every single tick of overtime to, the point where we played 70 minutes of football, and, Dallas went down, got their field goal, and Green Bay basically was just like, "Okay, well, we're gonna do everything we can to just get it down to 3 seconds so we can get our field goal and just get out of here with a tie." For me, it's the theory was always, hey, if we're on the road, right, we're trying to get the win, isn't it? Usually the theory is, because you usually chalk up a road game that, is usually a tougher environment, more difficult. And they were just seemed pretty satisfied the way they did it. And you figure if it's 10 minutes in overtime and it was a possession apiece, and both of these teams obviously had well over 400 yards a pop, it seemed really odd that it didn't get to the point, that there was not a touchdown essentially at overtime. You do have to credit, of course, both defenses who, essentially were playing, keeping everything in front of them, understanding,
Mhm,
basically how well both offenses were playing to that point. But if you're Dallas, I think you're pretty happy with yesterday's outcome. I think if you're Green Bay, you're in a situation now where you want to know what acquiring Micah Parsons was great and all. And on
mhm,
paper, it puts you in a position where maybe you look like an NFC favorite. And even factor in week one, they beat Detroit in Green Bay. But you look at where Detroit is over the last 3 weeks, and you look at where Green Bay is essentially over the last 2 weeks. And I think Detroit has essentially reminded everybody in the NFC North that that division does in fact run through Detroit. Green
mhm.
Bay, you're just not going to be able to just show up to get there. And Michael Parsons wasn't necessarily a real big factor yesterday. And I'm sure Jerry Jones is thrilled and thinks he's an absolute genius over it.
Yeah,
Um, but as far as just the way it went, and it just seemed, Dallas, look, you had it first. You got sold. You got your points. But it really just seemed like Green Bay was just kind of overly satisfied with just getting, the tying field goal and walking out of there. And
mhm.
for a game that went 70 minutes, put 80 points on the board, put over 800 total yards of offense on the board, I think when it was over, it was just like, well, that's it. I mean, it really felt like it was just such a flat ending to a game that had a huge amount of excitement to it up until that point.
Yeah,
Pickens, obviously, a huge breakout game. Romeo Dobbs with the hat trick. And,
mhm.
it just seemed so anticlimactic when it was over, where normally in a situation you'd be like, well, can we throw another 10 minutes on the board and let's run
Yeah,
this back for a little bit more? So, again, but, for Green Bay, this, yeah, okay, you're 2-1-1. But
mhm.
I think people right now have a lot more questions about the Green Bay Packers than they probably did 2 weeks ago.
Quick pause. If you haven't subscribed to the BetCanada YouTube channel, you can do so below. It's free and it helps support our channel so we can keep bringing you NFL and NHL content. Now, back to the show. We knew the Cowboys' defense was bad, and we moved to the Cowboys after this, but especially without Micah Parsons, did we crown the Packers' defense too early? Or maybe even the Packers as a whole? Because I feel like that was one of the big ones that we talked about heading into the season. What do you think after week 4?
So yeah, I mean, and again, this is not one of those things where you can just show up and play.
Mhm.
And other people besides Micah Parsons are gonna have to get it done.
Yeah.
And that's what essentially is the ultimate testament to one ridiculously good pass rusher. They have to take sometimes obviously the blocker. They get
Mhm.
chipped. Heck, there might be a second chip when you're really good. But you have to have the guys that say, you know what, I am going to soak up every one-on-one I get.
Yeah.
And because Micah Parsons is here, if my current belief in my current sack total was, hey man, if I get 6 this year, that's great. Well,
Mhm.
Micah Parsons coming to town now, you're gonna pay a little tax on that. Well, heck, maybe 7.5, 8.
Yeah.
This should be a lot easier for me now. And for Green Bay, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world, to have this and say, you know what, all right. And, obviously for their defensive coordinator who's been very successful there, has never really had that ultra one guy who was basically a star talent.
Mhm.
And now he does. You're going to have to get to work a little bit more here. And look, secondary has to get it done. Not one single pass rusher is not going to carry you through a 17 game season. It is a
Mhm.
great luxury to have. There's no question about it. But there are going to be weeks, and you see it with all of them, the TJ Watts, the Miles Garrett's. There's week where these guys get a lot of pressures, and
Yeah.
that's great. But it doesn't kill plays. It doesn't kill drives. It shows up on a stat sheet. PFF grades it obviously well. But you get into these situations where you need to truly get it done. And I think for Green Bay, maybe the excitement, the newness now is wearing off. And now it's, we have to be a little bit more diligent in
Mm.
how we're going to make this work on the defensive side of the ball. And it's certainly, moving Micah around creates a lot of fun if you're a defensive coordinator. But it's always now you're counting on, okay, one, two, three guys maybe doing a little bit of a different role. And then if Michael goes inside, okay, well, everybody, now, there's a carryover that's going to come with moving him around. Me, I'd probably start and say, look, he's going off the right end, he's going off the left end, 50%. And then I'm going to evaluate everybody else doing their jobs based on Micah Parsons just being an outside pass rusher.
Mm.
If you find out, you're getting wins and people are being successful and creating pressure from other spots, then maybe you go to the next step of it. Just because it worked for Dallas doing it with Micah Parsons being so versatile, moving him all over the
Yeah.
place, doesn't mean that just translates when you throw him into another defense. So there certainly has to be some work to be done, but it's certainly a nice problem, I think, for the Green Bay Packers to have to deal with.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. I was pretty surprised by this one, I'll be honest. My 2 big takeaways for the Cowboys in this one, I thought Brian Schottenheimer called a really good game. Dak Prescott is also playing some really, really incredible football right now. And I had seen that, but I feel like last night a lot of people had started to see it for the first time. Could this Cowboys team be maybe a last year's Bengals where as long as they're slinging it on offense, they'll still be in these games? Because Lord knows their defense isn't their strength, but their offense, even without CD, is surprising me.
Well, I mean, listen, when George Pickens is dialed in
Mhm.
and George Pickens doesn't get inside his own head, he has top 10 wide receiver potential. That catch he made on the sideline with the two guys, and they were bantering about feet. He had three in. So, I mean, I don't even know what they were bantering about because he actually got the 1 foot in twice. So he got
Yeah,
3 feet in. And, for a guy like Pickens, he can go one of two ways. He makes the big play, then he's a problem all day long for the defense. He doesn't make a big play. He then essentially becomes a problem for himself and a problem for the team he is currently playing on. But I think what you kind of saw last night and what's probably going to be the scenario for the Dallas Cowboys this year and why they, again, still don't agree, but why they felt comfortable moving Micah Parsons is I think they just felt they didn't have enough. I think, even with Micah, these problems are going to persist week in, week out.
oh yeah.
He's not going to sack the quarterback 5 times a game. So therefore, we're going to have our issues. And they have three corners, all of them battling injuries in somehow, some way. They're still trying to figure out the linebacker rotation. And they had the one guy who had a huge, huge, terrible penalty yesterday, where I think he took 4 steps before he lit the guy up, and then he turned around with his hands. It was like, well, come on, man, that was pretty obvious. So, for Dallas, I absolutely kind of agree with you. And for Dak Prescott last night, I think it was maybe that people didn't know, but maybe people just generally forgot. Dak
Yeah,
Prescott one day is going to retire from this league. And when people start going through his standing in NFL record books as far as quarterback play, I think people are essentially going to be blown away.
I
Yes,
agree.
it's going to look more like he was more of a compiler as opposed to just being a successful, great overall quarterback. But Dak Prescott can play, and you have to think and you have to know and believe that the Dallas Cowboys took that game last night. And you want to know what? We're not sure if we're a playoff team, but it's a weird and corny phrase, but they definitely went into that one last night with a Super Bowl mentality where it was like, you know what? All right, Micah. And your boys, we loved you. All things were good, but man, we're gonna do anything we can to hopefully win this game.